paper thin skin, held up longer than I was falling.
Welcome to Center Stage, the documentary podcast. Each week, our group of intrepid researchers and music archivists dig through the record crates of the world, looking for that one artist to take center stage. Using a patent-pending algorithm and spirited debate, we pick one artist. Once that is settled, we invite that artist into Thunderlove Studio to chat with your hosts Keith R. Higgins and Jeff Calhoun. When we're lucky, they say yes. Our mission with Center Stage is simple: to make sure the recorded work of artists remains, or in some cases lands on, the cultural radar. We invite you to sit back and relax. Thank you for joining us.
I've known Rob Janicke for what seems like a lifetime, but in reality, it has only been a few short years. In addition to being a father and husband, Rob is a talented writer who just released his first book, Slacker, 1991, Teen Spirit, Angst, and the Generation It Created. I sat down with Rob to catch up and chat about his new book. Here's my conversation with author Rob Janicke. Rob Janicke, welcome to Center Stage, and congratulations on your book, Slacker, 1991, Teen Spirit, Angst, and the Generation It Created. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
And welcome back.
Yes. It's a reunion of sorts, for sure.
It is. Not a carnival of sorts, a reunion of sorts.
Yeah.
So
great mug, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to grow up.
Yeah, I just caught a glimpse of it. I saw it. It's awesome.
Yep. I refuse to grow up.
Same here. That's why I wrote a book in my 50s.
It's better than never. And congratulations. It's a great book. I did finish it yesterday. I enjoyed it very much. One thing I want to ask you is what I really liked is the personal aspect of the book.
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to want to incorporate that into the particular narrative of Slacker?
It's a really good question because a lot of the feedback I'm getting so far is about that part of it. And the reason I included it, well, there's two things that go into it. I included it in early drafts, but I sort of tiptoed around a lot of it. I didn't go too deep. I was hinting at things, and the publisher was like, nope, I see what you're doing. Go, if you're going to go there, go there. Give the reader as much of yourself as you can. And the reason I did it in the first place, so backing up for a second, as you know, that music was very much written from a personal, at least lyrically, from a personal aspect of a lot of the songwriters. Depression, isolation, loneliness, addiction, suicide. I think that's one of the things that attracted people to the music when it first came out, because we weren't used to hearing that on the radio or on MTV, hearing lyrics that were so deep and so personal and in a lot of cases sad and scary. We had just come from the 80s, but girls just want to have fun and a lot of dance pop music, and which is all great, but I think that narrative struck a nerve with me. I know it did. And I think that's one of the reasons the scene got so big, at least in the beginning. So that's why I wanted to include it. But I credit the publisher for giving me the courage and the push, several pushes, not just one, to really tell my story personally, instead of tiptoe around it like I did in the first early draft.
No, it's great. It's great the way it starts off each chapter, and you weave it together quite well.
Thank you.
And it's great. Back to that 1991, I want to share with you a story that this just happened to me recently. I was driving back from Florida in early November, and I was listening to. Now, you and I have always had a discussion about Nirvana. I'm a Pearl Jam guy. You're a both guy, but you're more of a Pearl Jam fan guy.
Correct.
Safe to say. But I never got Nevermind. I liked it. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was a great record very much of the time, important, ... Yeah. But I was driving home from Florida and I was listening to Van Halen 1 and I heard Eruption, which I've heard thousands, tens of thousands of times,
Definitely. Yeah.
And I put myself in the place of a 1977, 78-year-old kid who's hearing that for the first time. And I'm like, this is just earth shattering. This is just mind melding. It's not to say he's the first to do it, but he certainly was the best to do it. And then I thought, you could almost probably see the light bulb go off over me. I'm like, oh, I get Nevermind now.
Yeah.
I get it. It was mind blowing because nobody was doing it that good, that well at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, I finally get it.
That's a great analogy. I never thought of it from that standpoint with that song, but meaning Eruption. But that's exactly what I believe happened. I know it happened to me. I was lucky that I was already listening to some of this music, when it comes to the late 80s, early 90s. I had been, as it, goes into the book, you learn about the mixtape and what I was introduced to in the late 80s. But Smells Like Teen Spirit wasn't on that tape. And the sound of Nevermind, or the sound of that song and what became Nevermind, at the time it came out, it was, it was a perfect storm. Like Nirvana, they are probably more important than they were great, if that makes sense.
Does to me.
Yeah. And look, musically, Kurt people would say, oh, he's a terrible guitar player, this or that, but I don't believe any of that. I don't think it's you don't have to be a shredder to be great. And, you don't only have to be a songwriter to be great. Like there's things you can mix and match and, taste is subjective anyway. Right. But the importance of that band and that record at that time, like most things in life, timing has a lot to do with whether or not you make it. And politically, culturally, just where we were in the world. I mean, I guess in the United States first and then globally, we were ready. We were just ready for that. And you're right. Hearing Eruption for the first time for a kid in the 70s must have been very, very similar to what happened with us in 91.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I really liked about the book was, there's several things I liked. The incorporation of hip hop, obviously, I enjoyed that. But with regards to Nevermind, it reaching that number one status on Billboard when it actually meant something. And dethroning the king of pop, Michael Jackson. My note in the book says, we won. Our generation won. This was a band that was speaking for our generation. We had a name thanks to a movie, and now we had music. We had a soundtrack.
We did
something amazing. How important do you think hip hop is to you first, and then to the slacker generation as a whole?
I personally think it is incredibly important. I think it is as important as what came out of Seattle because it started first, right? Hip hop was an earlier, genre of music. I mean, you can look back to I guess the mid to late 70s. I mean, people put it as early as 1973, but in common culture, I would say early mid 80s is when most of us in our generation really became aware of hip hop. And the reason I say is as important is because if you can think back to what we were listening to prior to just say Run DMC, right? Because they were probably the most popular introduction most of us got to hip hop. Prior to that, it is rock music made mostly by white people, at least on a commercial level. Then this new music comes around and everyone said it's a fad. It's not music. It's not going to last. A lot of reasons for that, probably because they were mostly black artists doing it. But they weren't playing instruments for the most part. So it was groundbreaking on so many levels. And the fact that it hit, the fact that it kicked open this new door in society and culture and music, I think, at least my theory is, a few years later when the Seattle thing happened, we were already ready for something new. Do you know what I mean? Like we were able to accept something new that we had never really heard before because hip hop kind of opened that door a little bit. And I kind of liken hip hop, at least in the early days, to the punk rock movement of the mid and late 70s. It was ferocious. It was cultural. It talked about things in society it did not like, and it didn't hold back. So I think hip hop was extremely, extremely important, and I wanted to include it in Slacker because it was a part of the narrative.
Okay.
There were bands in the early part of the decade, and then certainly by the end, as Eminem is one of the things I talk about at the very end. I mean, some of the most important and also commercially successful music all stems from hip hop. So yeah, it was incredibly important.
Yeah, and I love the way you drew a line in the sand with which I thought was an interesting parallel, and I don't know if you've gotten feedback on it, but how Raising Hell is the hip hop rap equivalent to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Like it really drew a line in the sand.
Yeah, it's anytime you bring up the Beatles in anything, you're going to get all sides. But so far, I mean, the book has been out for like a month or so now, I think. The official release isn't until a couple of weeks from now, but all the pre-orders and everything, they're all out in the world. So as people are reading it, I'm getting feedback. Most of it is positive, but some people, somebody said to me recently that they really liked it, and they were giving me some bits of what they liked about it, including the personal stuff. But one of the lines they said was, but I found myself having several arguments with a fictitious Rob sitting in front of me as they were reading them. And I think the Beatles part was, and pop music in general, I think was one of the reasons that this person said that. But you want to provoke thought. You want people to think. You want them to have a conversation. Sure. And I know people won't agree with everything I wrote. I know people might not like it, and that's okay. But it's, why do something if it's if you think everybody's going to like it? That means it's kind of boring, I think.
Yeah, and you do go to a fair deal of length to explain that it's all subjective.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is Rob's opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think you do that really well.
Thank you. And one of the things that I was thinking of this as I was writing some of it, obviously, you and Abandoned Albums podcast came into play a lot for me because one of the first things I thought about was, remember when we had Vaden, Todd Lewis from the Toadies on, and we talked about this sort of not in a negative way, but the split between people who were Replacements fans and people who were Pixies fans. There was these two camps, and you being a massive Replacements fan and Vaden being more on the Pixies side. So right there, we had several people talking who love music and pretty much agree on most of it. But yet there's still this subjective split that very like-minded people can have. And I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, it's important to remind people that you're not always going to agree, and it's okay to not agree.
Yeah,
It makes for passionate conversation. I like that.
for sure. And that is the one common thread throughout the entire series of abandoned albums is the dichotomy between the Pixies and the Replacements. So far, the Replacements have been mentioned more, but just by a little bit. But almost literally 90% of the artists that have been on the show have mentioned either one of those bands.
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting.
It is interesting, and it's great that it is recognized for those bands in particular, because now the Pixies probably had a little bit more commercial success, right? I would say over time. But neither band has gotten the due that they deserve commercially, which I guess, who am I to judge? But they were so incredibly important to so many bands that followed. It is a shame that they didn't rise to levels of other bands after them.
Which leads me to this point. We talk about the Replacements and the Pixies.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that 1987 was when the fuse was lit, and that American college radio had a large role in that. Tell us more about that.
So, at least from my perspective, that's kind of when I started. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn, as you know, so I luckily in New York City, you have access to a lot of things. And back then, radio meant a lot. And there were several college radio stations available to me at the time, and even late night radio that would play non-top 40 music, but they would only play it at night on stations that weren't necessarily college stations. But around 87 is where I remember hearing bands like REM, certainly by then U2, which, I guess really wasn't a college band anymore, but that's where they had sprung from. And it just started to become more of a conscious sound. And I was more aware of bands that were not popular yet. But then I discovered this underground, of college radio. And soon after that, when I got this tape, and then soon after the tape, all these bands, a lot of them became popular and famous. It all reminded me of what I was hearing back in 87 and 88 and around that time. So that to me was like, wow, this is something that is, looking back, it was like, there you go. I can point to that. Jane's Addiction was one of those bands.
Yeah.
That became a fuse lighter, if that's even a term. But they were on the scene early. Yeah. They were on the scene early enough to influence what came soon after. So, I think as I was doing research and trying to remember where I was during those years, that year stood out.
We mentioned the Replacements and the Pixies, and one band that I've been thinking about as I was reading your book and finishing your book that had a tremendous impact on 1991 or I feel had a tremendous impact is REM.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, I think you highlight Document, and I go back one further, and I'm wondering if you had any thoughts about Life's Rich Pageant being ground zero for really that grungy, I'm finger quoting for those listeners, grungy sound.
Yeah.
You had any thoughts?
Yeah, no, it absolutely could be. I mean, REM, and that might have been in the previous question, that might have been the first band I mentioned about the college radio bands. REM was, and I mean, they're all still around. The band isn't technically around, but so I guess we can talk about them in the present tense. But they are incredibly influential to everything that came afterwards. And REM is one of those bands. Yes, so you could say that they contributed to acceptance of that crunchy sound, or that a little bit rough around the edges. The jangly guitar work for sure. The Teen Spirit, was about before the distortion kicks in. But REM also, I think, and going back to the earlier records too, I think you heard the beginning of what they would become in terms of every song could be different and it was okay. They did not have to follow a pattern. Maybe early on it was all maybe similar, but you could hear things in what they were doing in their songwriting. And as their sound evolved, they became just, I think, a band to look back on. If I was a musician in coming up in the 90s, I'd look at REM as like, that's how I want to write songs, music.
Yeah.
Like so I would say that you can go, so I mentioned Document, right? That was the one you brought up.
I think
was
so, yeah.
Right?
Pretty sure.
I think you're right. And again, it probably, for me, and I was writing it from my point of view, for the most part, music is visual sometimes too, right? And I remember like getting some of these early records and I could just envision the cassette tape back then, or, soon after the CD. And that was the one that I remember kind of falling in love with, I think probably first. So it's probably why I mentioned that one. But to your point, yes, you could go back to anything that band did and hear what would become that grunge sound.
That being said, I want to first ask you the title of the book, 1991 Teen Spirit, Angst, and the Generation It Created.
Yeah.
Is 1991 really ground zero for, and again, for those, I'm going to use the word grunge, and we'll get to that in a second. Is that really ground zero for grunge, or would you go back a couple of years?
I mean, two ground zeros, if we can have them. I use 91 because it is the commercially accepted year that, and really, if you're really being, or if I'm really being honest, probably 92, because that's when like all these great records, Nevermind, 10, Bad Motorfinger, they all came out in 91. But 90, and they came out late. They came out in the fall for the most part. Most of them did. Right. Late summer and fall. So 92, in January when Nevermind became number one on the Billboard chart. Like, so really you can use 92, but 91 is the year, as time has gone on, that has been sort of the commercial ground zero. But it's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I started the book I didn't start. The book starts in 1984. I didn't start writing it at 11 years old. But I use 1984 as the very beginning because that's when Green River and Soundgarden and all of those other early Seattle bands started. Some started as early as 81 and 82. So I don't know, man. 91 would be the commercial ground zero for me. I don't know if I could put another year on the exact, like the official ground zero. I mean, maybe I stick with 84 because that's what I pointed to in the book. But to your point, what I think your follow-up was going to be the term grunge. I mean, that wasn't really a thing, certainly. So I don't know. I'll stick with 91 for the commercial aspect. It's hard to come up with 1 year before that.
Sure. I understand. You gotta commit to one thing. I do want to talk about grunge because grunge is often considered a sound, but you in the book point out that it's so much a sound as a musical and cultural period, sort of like the way Laurel Canyon might be from the 70s, right?
It's another good comparison, yes.
It denotes an era more so than a sound. Although there is a sound associated with it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. And I've had this argument with people, I mean, dating all the way back to 91, 92. Like, well, once the term became synonymous with these bands, I do remember, and maybe I was taking a cue from the guys in these bands back then. They all hated the term. I didn't quite understand why back then. But as time went on, I think I figured out why, and I certainly believe it. If you really listen to this music, at least the early stuff, and if you want to take, people say there's the four, the top four, grunge bands, and they'd be Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains. they don't really sound alike. The earlier stuff than that, like there's like, I'll back up for 1 second. So yes, there is a sound that's associated with it initially, and that was that fuzzy, muddy, distorted sound that Mark Arm was talking about from Green River and then Mudhoney. Guys like Buzz Osborne from the Melvins, So yeah, initially I think they were attaching that heavy, distorted, crunch, muddy sound, drop D, muddy bass lines, things like that. But then it got put onto pop rock bands later on in the decade. So anyone associated with that music, or anyone who had flannel cut off shorts, Doc Martens, it all got labeled that. And, there's nothing wrong with marking a period of time with a name. And as I say in the book, like, unless you name it, it's hard to talk about it. Like if I said to you, let's have a conversation about disco or punk rock or classical music, even, we can hear that immediately. We know what that music sounds like, and it doesn't really deviate all that much. But, I bet you there are kids now coming up who, if they look at music from that time, they might consider, I don't know, Jesus Jones or Ned's Atomic Dustbin grunge, because they came out in the early 90s and they toured with all those bands. Or REM, like we were talking about before. They may lump them in. Who knows? I mean, but I think it's easier to call it like a stamp on a time period and an era rather than a sound.
That's fair. I loved the way, I think grunge, as long as we're talking about grunge, has this giant misunderstanding that it's crunchy guitars, and it is, and that it's loud, and it often is, but it can often be soft, as you point out with the Alice in Chains EP Sap.
Yeah.
Which is another pivotal moment in those early 90s. I think that was 92 or 93. I don't remember.
I think Sap was 90. I want to say 92, because I think it came out the same year Dirt came. I think it came out right before Dirt, and Dirt came out in 92.
It changed the perception of grunge, that it can be soft and acoustic and still be hard. You know?
Yeah. That's a great observation, because the loudness of the guitars that we were talking about, or the crunchiness of the grunge sound as it was thought of, shifted with Sap. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I mean, look, Lane Staley from Alice in Chains and Jerry Cantrell, they had such a beautiful harmony with their voices, and their voices gelled together so well when they sang. But it was beautiful, but it was dark. The subject matter Lane and Jerry both wrote about lyrically, that subject matter was dark. So I think that contributed to, okay, this isn't just a rock ballad. This is the same stuff we're hearing that was loud. The content is the same. They're just turning the music down, but it's still like, a lot of minor keys being played, musically. So it sounds ominous. But you're right. The fact that it was soft and it was acoustic for the most part. It sort of allowed for other grunge artists to play softer music and still be part of that scene.
So let's talk about 1991. What a year. Let's see if I can, I know I've got it marked here. All the albums that came out. Yeah, here's a list. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Bad Motorfinger, which I think respectively was Pearl Jam in August, Nirvana in September, and Bad Motorfinger in October. I think. Yeah.
It was, back to back to back.
Temple of the Dog, Mudhoney, Gish by the Smashing Pumpkins, The Pixies, Trump Le Monde, The Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest, Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, on and on and on. What a year it's hard to put that into context for anyone listening to this now who wasn't there.
Yeah.
Because it's just so, most of these albums have come to be classics.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Most of them in their genre, at least, like if they weren't massively, um, commercially huge for whatever genre it was, they led the way, and they allowed people to follow in those footsteps of those great albums.
And we talk about seismic shifting moments in 91, and this isn't necessarily the grunge thing. For me, it's U2 and Achtung Baby, because they took the one sound that they had in the 80s and they completely inverted it and created this entire new sound that melded some elements of electronica with some grungy guitars.
Yeah.
They did that quite well. Yeah. No,
they did. And to that point, like, that just shows you a band like that already, and I don't know if you agree, but we can throw Metallica into that too with the Black Album.
Oh, for sure.
That was also 91, and they changed from what they were known for. They toned everything down and made 4-minute songs instead of 8-minute songs, and bigger, catchier hooks. But with U2, that band was arguably, right, the biggest band in the world. Maybe them and Guns N' Roses, right, around the late 80s. And even a band that big and that successful, talking about U2 again, to make that change, that just shows you that whatever was happening, whatever was in the air and the water and the climate during those years, because obviously when a record comes out, it was worked on at least a year before, usually.
Yeah.
So these bands were writing music in 89 and 90 and early parts of 91, and then the stuff comes out. So something was happening that was allowing even a band like U2 with tremendous success to say, you know what, we need something different. We can do whatever we want. And maybe that was their mindset because they were so big. But the rest of the world, the bands that we didn't know about yet, they were like, I don't want to hear pop music anymore. I don't want to hear, hair metal anymore. I want to do whatever I want to do, and it's going to be fine one way or the other. Little did they know it blew up.
Yeah, I'm curious those external factors and what led to, because I think we've talked a little bit or danced around the issue. A lot of these songs, we talked a little bit about it, but they're very insular, know? I'm curious what you think, what was going on culturally on a societal level that, and I consider myself part of this generation as well. I turned inward, and that's why these bands spoke so much to me, is they were saying things better that I couldn't, saying things that I couldn't say much better. And it was a raw emotion. I'm just curious what you think, what was happening culturally on a societal level that was going on that may have influenced some of this.
One of the big things for me, and then as I found out through research for the book, in 91, I was 17, 18 years old, and my birthday's in May. So I remember feeling, and you just brought it up, there was this personal attachment, and people were saying things that I felt deeply, but didn't know how to say, or if I did know how to say, I certainly didn't have a platform for it, and I'm hearing this, and it's like, wow, there's more people like this, or more people like me than I ever realized. And it turns out that our generation grew up, and I'm one of them, highest rate of divorce in the United States during that period, growing up through the 80s, which is where I was growing up in a single parent home. Single mom, working 3 jobs, complete latchkey kid, left to my own devices. Had a younger sister. I learned how to cook and clean and do laundry at a really young age. So if you couple that, and the stats were there to prove it about how many kids grew up like that. As the 80s continued, we were growing up and we were old enough to see, all of this like wild, rich lifestyle, money, fame, it was the height of celebrity for a while. And if you were paying attention to music, it was all glitz and glamour, even rock, with hair metal. And it was all about glamour, glitz, money, fun, parties. And that wasn't my reality at all. I I was a lonely kid, and so does that answer like your question as to why because I think that's one of the reasons why it hit and why people turned inward and why people were feeling this music, because we grew up at a time without parents, or without at least one parent in my case.
Yeah.
And looking at life that didn't resemble ours. So once this stuff came out, we were like, yes, this is ours. This is for us.
Yeah, 100%. For me, I did grow up with both parents, but I was also a latchkey kid because both parents worked, because you had to. But for me, it was growing up in the 80s. It's like, I don't want that, what they had, but I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want that. And then these bands come along and it's like, all right, we're not alone. There are other people who don't want that, and by that, I mean, the suburban life, there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you choose to do. There's certainly no harm in that, but suburban life, all that sort of life. But so that's what it was for me.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe, and tell me if you agree with this or not, but I think, our parents, at least our parents' generation, they were raised by people from the Depression, essentially, right? Yeah. So then our parents grow up in a tough way, and then they have kids of their own, which became us. And they're all about, you got to go to school, you got to get a college degree, go, get a job on Wall Street or work for the city, get a pension, retire and die. Like there was no, at least in my world, there was no guide towards creativity. There was no like, what makes you happy? I mean, I was actually told that happiness didn't exist. People would say, well, everyone hates their job. Just, you're not special. Go get a job that you hate too and pay the bills. Like, what? That doesn't sound like any fun. I don't want. So I think our generation was the first to start rebelling against that mindset.
For sure. I agree with that 100%. I know. Yeah. I mean, my father had me reading management books in the 8th grade. And I had no desire. I think I kind of wanted to do it because my dad wanted me to do it. But then I discovered the wonderful world of weed. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. That holds no appeal to me.
No. And we were on the cusp. Our generation, we were the last sort of non-digital group of kids. And then we entered the very beginning of the internet, the very beginning of the digital world. So we started, even if it wasn't conscious yet, we were like, no, there's more to this. There's more to this life. I don't have to be a bus driver. I don't have to be, a school teacher. All great careers. And I have family and friends who do both. But
sure.
We were at the very beginning of like a new horizon. Like we saw possibilities, even if it was a subconscious thing at the time. So that added to the rebellion, I think. And then we hear other people a little older than we were, not much, just a little. I mean, the guys in that Seattle scene, when it broke in 91, were all in their mid-20s.
Yeah.
So they weren't that much older than we were.
No, they were our people.
Yeah. Yeah, they were. And they gave us, a roadmap to a different way. And who knew? I had no idea if we could follow it, if I could follow it. I didn't have a clue. I just knew I wanted to. I wanted to go that direction, whatever that direction meant, which I don't even know if I still know what it means, but I'm following it.
But they gave us a voice, a collective voice, and that's what I think makes the song so relevant even today. Although I often wonder if kids, well, let me ask you, have you found that the music resonates with the younger generation? The grunge, the grunge. Now I sound my age.
I've done that too.
Do you think it resonates with kids, with younger folks today the same way it did?
So it depends on what we'd call younger. In the book, I interviewed the Chris Salona, the guy who created Grunge Bible on Instagram, which is almost 1 million followers now, which is unbelievable that that's the case. He does a phenomenal job, and he's in his mid-20s. Or maybe he's in his late 20s now, but he's young. I'm in my early 50s. We're twice his age. So I consider him young, and I consider the people who follow him young as well. And it absolutely resonates with them. Now, To go younger, it's a little hit or miss. I can only give you the examples I see personally in my personal life. My kids are young; they're 11 and 8. So that world, if they're introduced to it, which I've introduced a lot of this music to my kids, now they're old enough to start asking questions and wondering about, like, even artwork. If they see an album cover, even if it's a digital version, they'll ask me questions about it. Or, my son loves hip hop. That's his favorite genre. But I have a playlist that I play in the car, one for him and one for me. And a lot of times he asks for mine. He's like, Daddy, play your playlist. And he likes certain songs. So I think it's less with that age group in terms of it resonating, but it can, if it's taught to them, I guess, like anything else, or at least they're exposed to it.
That's it. That's it.
But people in their mid-20s and 30s, I think absolutely. I think they're finding it now and adopting it as their own, kind of the way we probably adopted like the Beatles and the Stones or Zeppelin, the Who, Sabbath. That wasn't our music.
No.
We were second generation to that. And
that's fair.
I fell in love with it. I know you did for the most part, right? So
for sure.
Yeah, it can happen.
It can happen. You've written the book, and there are personal stories in it, and that's one of the strongest elements of the book is the personal connection. Mm-hmm. And would you say that writing helps you make sense of the world and helps you make sense of music and how music impacts your world? Yeah.
It helped me make sense of me. Mm-hmm. That was the first thing I took from this experience, or maybe not the first thing, but one of the bigger picture things that came out during this process. Trying to figure out who I started this book. You remember when I started this book? Uh-huh. I was in my I'll be 52, and I was in my late 40s when this started. It's been a 4+ year project. And when you're pivoting your life at that point, because it's a big pivot, I was in the corporate world for a very long time. And like many people, lost my job years ago and started a little record label, and then got back into writing, trying to get back into writing full time at that point as well. I was like, why am I doing this now? Is this even possible? Should I? What is, I have kids. This is, what am I doing? But writing the book and going through this process and writing about some of the things I wrote about on the personal level, it gave me a much better sense of who I am. And it allowed me to be okay with the fact that I am not that corporate guy that I was for, the first 15, 20 years of my life after college. And I am this guy. I've always been this guy, but I had no idea how to go about presenting it.
Yeah.
So it was eye-opening. It's scary, but it's also it's liberating too.
Sure.
Because now I feel like, well, all right, I did it, and I'm doing more of it as we speak. Hopefully, things are we're working on some other things. I don't know, man. It was a big self-introspection thing, and it was worth it from that point of view, anyway. From that perspective.
How did it come to be? How did you end up with a publisher? How did it?
I got lucky.
Happen?
I got lucky. Well, we talked about timing, right? With Nevermind. So in a way, I feel like that's what happened with me a little bit. I had the book ended somewhere in the 65,000 word total, at about 30,000 words. So half of what was written. That's when the publisher and I met. And I was introduced to this publisher, inspired by you books, through a mutual friend. And I was submitting already to other places. And I submitted to them as well. Didn't hear back from anybody. And the few people I did hear back from were no's. No, thank you. And then the rest were just ghosts, nothing.
Right.
By the time Inspired by You books got back to me, I was under the impression that I was just going to just keep writing and figure out how to get it out whenever it was done, if it was ever done. And the woman who owns the company, Jen, she got in touch with me and started talking, loved the idea. And this is where it all started it didn't all start, but this is where the real push to make it personal came from. Because her point of view was there are a lot of music books in the world. There are a lot of music books that people, like what I was writing about was very well known, just say Nirvana and Pearl Jam to anybody, they know who they are. They might not know the whole scene, but they know those bands. So she was like, what separates this idea from other music books is the personal aspect that you are trying to deal with here and how it's going to weave its way through the whole thing. Because that was the original idea, go from the beginning to the end of the whole movement with my life intertwined. And at that time, the publisher didn't have anything like this. And they were working on a book. They wanted to get more into the entertainment side of publishing. They were doing they had some children's books, they had some novels, they had some self-help stuff, some great work, but nothing in the entertainment world per se. And right before my book, they had signed Dave Knoll, who was the creator of the TV show Chopped. And he was writing a book, and they were publishing his book, and that was television. That was entertainment. That's the direction they wanted to start adding to their profile. So I came along. I had, to them, an interesting idea. It wasn't just a music book. The people there, most of them are our age, so they know this genre very well. And I was halfway through with it. So, it was it was a really good time to jump in. Like, they didn't have to create anything, so to speak, or work with me from the very beginning, which could have been a much longer process. So these things all kind of came together. Had they had other music books, had they been, who knows? I don't know if they would have said yes at a point before or a point after, but I think, timing was right, and their appreciation of what I was trying to say hit them and hit me. And it was, it's how it came to be.
Well, good it did. Not the typical publishing process, but
no. And I will say that their help, their guidance, and then what I really learned, I mean, it was invaluable for sure, but editing this thing made and I did not edit this. There's no shot in hell I could have done it.
Oh, really?
I could no. I mean, look, could I have done it? Yes, but it would not have been good. Because when the editing process started and I was getting notes from the editors, they allowed me to think it like they didn't change a lot, but their suggestions, some of them changed everything. They said, hey, they would, highlight a paragraph or two or whole, like, hey, maybe this should be in a different chapter, like it was things like that. And I'd read what they were talking about and think about their suggestions. And then it made me think about the content differently. Mm-hmm. So I would rework if I agreed with it. And there were a couple of things I said, no, I want to leave alone. And they were okay with that. But then when I did take some of their advice and I made some changes based on their, way I should look at it or think, or they say, hey, just try it this way. It allowed me to be more open, and it changed, it changed the feel for some of the parts of the book. Simply based on them asking me questions and say, maybe look at it a little differently. I couldn't have done that by myself. I wouldn't have asked myself the same questions.
Right.
They asked me.
Sounds more collaborative than dictatorial.
Completely. Yeah. It's like, and I know you know this process too. It's like recording an album or being around musicians when they're writing. If you're too close to something, you're probably not the best person to have your set of eyes, or your eyes shouldn't be the only set of eyes on it.
No,
you need other people who know what they're doing and understand what you want from it. And like you just said, it wasn't a dictatorship. It was like they understood the vision and they were like, okay, I get it, but maybe try it this way. And, it's like having a great producer in the studio when you're, making music.
Yeah. I just cracked open the book and I want to single out one sentence that I singled out, at least in this particular, for those who can't see, I've got notes and tabs all over. That's the thing about music. It has power and reach beyond most, if not all, mediums and art forms and time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Good work transcends everything.
Yeah. Yeah. It hits you in a way that for some reason sticks with you for forever. And then it goes on, right? We're still celebrating music of people who, lived and died decades ago.
Yeah.
And it's still around. So yeah, there's something about music that the other ones don't have.
No. I'm going to pick out a couple more. What did I write here? I'm going to highlight here. One thing we haven't talked about. MTV was perhaps the biggest force in shaping and shifting culture by the time Nevermind was released. That is a true statement.
Yeah.
It was.
Remember?
Yeah. Yeah. It made all the difference.
It really did. And they decided, they were the tastemakers. They were the hit makers, radio stations to a degree, record labels to a bigger degree. But MTV, I mean, and I mentioned it in the book too. When the single, when Smells Like Teen Spirit was released, it made noise, but the noise it made once the video hit so. We talked about fuses before. If Smells Like Teen Spirit, the single was a fuse, was a lit fuse. Smells Like Teen Spirit, the video was the explosion. That thing just took off and went berserk. And again, probably they were just throwing shit against the wall about what the video should look like and be about, but they nailed it. The look of that video, it's in a high school, raging kids, goth cheerleaders, and this old janitor digging all of it. Like nothing. And maybe it's hindsight being 2020. I don't know. But that visual with that song at that time, you couldn't have scripted it better.
No, there was something recognizable about the video. I think we all recognized ourselves in one capacity or another in that video. And I think that's what, at least I did. And that's what made it resonate so much.
Yeah. Yeah. You couldn't take your eyes off it when it came on the screen.
No. I didn't recognize myself as the old janitor. I wasn't that old then, but yeah.
No. Maybe now though. Maybe now we can, looking back, I could shimmy around like that to some good rock music.
Now I am that old janitor. This is also a great sentence. In particular to Nevermind. I got to cut out that sniff. Nevermind satisfied a need we weren't aware we had, which I think we've sort of talked about a little bit. We didn't know. Like when I first heard Pearl Jam, I read a little sidebar in Rolling Stone. I'm like, all right, well, that sounds interesting. I picked up the record long before I knew of Nirvana. I didn't know, I knew nothing of Bleach.
Right.
So I picked up Pearl Jam and I'm like, oh my God, I had the same reaction one of the people you interview in the book had. Like, holy fuck, this is unlike anything I'd ever heard before, but I recognize where it came from.
Yeah.
And it just resonated so deeply with me, even though I didn't grow up in the same type of environment that Eddie Vedder did. But then it was Nevermind that really hit the nail on the head. And I think that's just a great way to say, we didn't know we needed that.
Yeah. And I think I always feel more connected to something that surprises me in a good way than something that maybe I could see coming or maybe have predicted. We didn't know we needed that. Maybe we knew we needed something, like we were talking about earlier, coming out of the 80s. seeing a lifestyle that was being presented to us that we weren't too happy about pursuing. So we probably knew we didn't want what existed, and we knew we wanted something different, but we didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
And then it happened, and it was so identifiable. It was so immediate too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember, and I know you could relate to this. I remember reading articles as a kid in Rolling Stone, Hit Parader, Cream, Spin, you name them. Well, maybe not Spin right away. That was probably a little later. But I remember reading articles about musicians, already established big rock musicians in the 80s, when these articles came out, feeling that way with the first time they saw Kiss.
Yeah.
And they were like, I don't know what that is. I don't know if they're human. I don't know what they are, but what they're doing is what I want to do. It was that quick for a lot of those people who, Kiss was their launching pad. And for the 90s, the early 90s, that was for us. Like that's it. Like it just is, and sometimes things don't need an explanation. You just feel it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I think that might be the first time I publicly said something positive about Kiss.
Yeah, I'm not a Kiss fan.
No, neither am I. But so many of these guys are, and I do appreciate the fact that they had an impact on people to make them want to do it. So, but that was I usually say very negative things about Kiss.
Yeah, not my cup of tea. Well, this goes back to a question I asked you. Writing this book helps me make sense of what was and what became in ways I hadn't completely understood until putting words on a page.
Yeah.
Well said.
Thank you. I think I wrote this, maybe it's in the foreword or somewhere probably early, but I did start writing as most people do. If you write, you usually start in your teen years, probably, maybe even earlier. And it was, some poetry or just some feelings or whatnot. And it was always, I guess, cathartic, but hard to come up with a reason why I was doing it. Like after the fact, it felt good, but you didn't know why you started in the first place.
Right.
But this process has definitely it's not going to be the last, hopefully, but the fact that it's out is the exclamation point for me that I was supposed to do this from a very early age. And it allowed me to maybe prove to myself that, okay, I know you've been this guy, but you never really allowed yourself to be. Now you did. And that's, if nothing else comes of it, that's big, at least for me.
That's 100% validation,
Yeah. Yeah.
For 100%. The one button I really like, and I don't think you intended it as a button, or maybe you did. We'll find out as I ask the question. The way you sum up the 90s, we didn't get to the latter half of the 90s. It's a whole other pod.
Yeah.
We entered the decade with a bang and went out with a blowjob, which is like a really nice button.
Yeah. Well, if you were a child or a young adult in the Clinton years, as we were, the idea that that and I'm sure everyone's familiar. I would assume everyone listening or watching is familiar with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. Do you think that everybody is?
By now, I would hope so.
Yeah. The fact that was the thing in culture, that was the world was talking about this blowjob. Like it had to be. I mean, look, I guess I kind of get it, but I also think okay, can we move on? Like, did this have to take months? And it was just a weird thing to me when I wrote it. I don't remember exactly, why it came to me that way, but it felt like everything was so positive in the beginning. This big thing, this big explosion. It was great, and then I guess maybe the bang and the blowjob, there's sexual innuendo in both words. uh, but yeah, I don't know. It just felt like it's kind of a bit of a letdown, you know.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think you do a good job of, at least in my opinion, you did a good job of highlighting how the music of that latter half of the 90s was kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
Aside from Eminem and a few others.
You're right. There were a few others. Well, and one of the things, and that reminds me of one of the great lines, I think, from any of the interviews I did. And it's one from the Abandoned Albums. I think she said it on Abandoned Albums. Tracy Bonham's interview. We had, because I interviewed her separately for the book as well, but I referenced both. And the story that she tells of flying over in a helicopter, the 1999 Woodstock with Sheryl Crow. See, you know, and the way she described it was great. And I hope it came across the right way, but she, you know, they're watching all of these shirtless, jacked up white guys, hats backwards with DMX on stage, you know, rap or whatever. It's all this testosterone and you know, her and Cheryl looked at each other and they were like, we're fucked.
Yeah.
This is it. It's over. It's done. And I love that take because it kind of felt that way, you know, and that's a harsh reality. That's you know, you go from this creative, introspective, personal, vulnerable music, even though it was heavy and hard, but to, you know, Tracy Bonham and Sheryl Crow realizing like, okay, yep, it's over. We got nothing but jocks beating each other up now.
Yep. Misogynistic jocks beating each other up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was that. I like the way she put the stamp on that period.
Well, Rob, we are at time. One, thank you. What is next for you? What are you working on now?
So
can you tell us?
Yeah, there's so one thing for sure. I'm writing sort of what would be a follow-up to this. I decided that the first book that I wanted to write was this entire generation, if you will, that you know, so it's a bigger overview. But then I wanted to sort of hone in on something specific from that. So I'm taking something from the book, and I'm going to write more specifically to that one thing, if that makes any sense. Like I'm going to pull something from the book. Yeah, it's something, and it was musical and cultural. So I'm working on that, but I don't have. I'm hoping to get some people involved. So if that happens, great. If not, I'll have to redirect a little bit and do it on my own. But I've already started that, and I know it's a little vague, but
it's which leads me to beg the question: can you tell us or no? If you can't, that's fine.
Not yet, because I'm waiting on somebody to agree to help. And yeah, if that person can't do it, then I have to redirect it a little bit. But it is something in the book. It's something in the 90s, something that relates to music and culture. It's just one aspect that I'm pulling out of something I've already written about and making a bigger, you know, story on it. So it'll be incredibly familiar if I can get this done. And then hopefully there are some people who have contacted us. I say us, myself and the publisher, about possibly making a little bit of a documentary or a docuseries out of this. I think it sets itself up for that, you know, because you could piecemeal it. You could kind of do it easily if
oh, for sure.
Yeah. So
in fact, I'm disappointed I didn't even think of that.
Well, there's a couple of people who have separate, they're not related to one another, and they came and they said, hey, you know, this might be an idea. What do you think?
Yeah.
So that's possible. But then me personally, just outside of anybody else's influence, I'm doing some book signings, and I am going to hopefully be doing some speaking engagements, particularly about the mental health aspect of it all, the emotional effect, the relationship to music, and you know, feelings, people's emotions, and how that connection can be very positive, especially for people who may have had trouble prior to having music help them and or save them, if you want to use that term.
Yeah, I've always felt and found comfort in, I call it sad bastard music. When I'm down in the dumps and I listen to sad songs and people are like, that's so depressing. It's like, yeah, but it's not.
It's not.
I'm not alone.
No. And there's, believe it or not, there are studies done on that. Heavier music, sad music, whatever, angry music, it doesn't make you feel sad. It doesn't make you feel angry, because it actually lifts you up, because, again, consciously or subconsciously, you're recognizing that other people feel the way you feel. And inherently that should make you feel better. And I think that does for a lot of people.
It does for me, for sure.
Yeah. So some schools, I did it once last year, and some school districts have asked me to come in for SEL week, social emotional learning week. I don't know if they have that in your schools out by you. I'm sure they do.
I don't have children, so I wouldn't know.
I guess that's a very good point. But
it's important. It sounds important.
Yeah, it's so public schools. I'm in New York. The DOE of New York City has this. They call it SEL, social emotional learning, and it's they dedicate a week to it. I mean, it's part of the curriculum throughout the year. They try to inject bits and pieces of it throughout the year, but they dedicate an entire week to it, where they bring in speakers and they focus solely on the emotional aspect of learning for children and how they feel in relation to why are they having trouble learning something, or why are they having trouble in school? What's happening at home? What's happening, up here? Are you okay? And speakers, authors, psychologists of all different walks of life have been brought in to, have auditorium discussions or classroom discussions. And I did it once last year in New Jersey, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And to your point, I know we're at time, and I'm sorry, but there was a line of kids after one of the conversations in this auditorium. So to your point about, can this resonate with young people? These were teenagers in a high school, and they were lined up to ask me questions after the talk was over. And it was about the music and about the connection to how people feel, but a lot about the music. So kind of blew me away. So I want to do more of that too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, look forward to it. And you've got to come up to Connecticut and do a speaking engagement up here, at least a book signing.
I would love to. Yeah. Any bookstores that we're doing a few Barnes and Noble in Jersey and here in Staten Island. And we're trying to get some in and around the other boroughs. But Connecticut is not far, and I would gladly come up and, find some indie book, because I'm going to do some indie signings too, not just the big box places. It's going to be indie bookstores as well that are booked for me going forward, I think through March so far. So, let me know if you know of any. I can reach out. We can figure it out.
Well, listen, Rob, I want to say thank you, and welcome back. Welcome back.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I mean, it was fun to write the book, but it was fun to have our conversations, my experience with abandoned albums in the back of my mind. All the stuff we did together, a lot of it is in there, either by name or not, but a lot of it showed up. So thank you for, giving me that experience when that happened. And I'm just really happy that you're still doing it, and you're like branching off and creating a lot of great content. I follow it, and I hope, whatever you have coming up is awesome, fun, successful, everything you want it to be.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. Buy the book, folks. And I'm going to hit end.
Many thanks to Rob for his time and years of support.
This episode of Centre Stage was written and produced by Keith R. Higgins. The show was recorded at Thunderlove Studio, where it was engineered by
Daphne Morris,
with help from
Penetration.
Edited by
Vic Titball,
with help from
Clem Fandango.
Our theme song is Cynical by Jaguar on Mars. You can stream Jaguar on Mars wherever you stream your favorite music.
Original music by Mike Pellegrino.
If you like what you've heard, please remember to subscribe and leave us a rating. It helps other people find the podcast. Thanks for listening.
Grazie.
Bailey Leaf,
Rob Janicke, Mike Pellegrino, Farina Bella,
S.W. Loudon,
Michael Janicke, Peyton Janicke.
This show's executive producer is Lulu McGillicuddy and is in the loving memory of
Lucas Thunderlow.
And now, until we meet again next time, I remain as always for the and for the arts.
Abandoned Albums is a production of Paw Print Media.